"Ma'am, you're going to make this harder than it needs to be." The metallic click of handcuffs cut through the late afternoon air like a dropped coin in a silent room. Sharp, final, impossible to ignore. People turned. Not all at once, but enough. A ripple of attention moved across the sidewalk outside the small neighborhood pharmacy on Linden Avenue, where the sun hung low, casting long shadows across cracked concrete and parked sedans. Officer Daniel Brooks stood tall in the center of it, his navy uniform pressed, his badge catching the last gold light of the day. His grip was firm but controlled, guiding the frail wrists of the woman in front of him as if the moment required precision rather than force. Evelyn Carter did not resist. She stood there, 72 years old, her back slightly curved with time, her gray curls tucked neatly beneath a soft beige hat that had seen better seasons. Her coat, a worn wool blend, hung loosely from her shoulders, the sleeves just a touch too long, brushing against her trembling hands now held together at her lower back. A thin plastic bag dangled from one wrist, a bottle of medication visible inside, the label catching a flicker of red and blue from the patrol car idling at the curb. The engine hummed low, steady, indifferent. Around them, the world slowed but did not stop. A man in a business suit paused mid-step, his phone halfway to his ear. A teenage girl leaned against a lamppost, lifting her camera without thinking, her thumb hovering before pressing record. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded, long and impatient, quickly swallowed by the weight of the moment. Evelyn's eyes did not search for help. They didn't dart from face to face or plead for understanding. Instead, they remained still, grounded, fixed somewhere just beyond Officer Brooks' shoulder, as if she were looking through him rather than at him. There was no fear in them, no panic, just a quiet steadiness that felt out of place against the tension tightening the air. "I asked you a simple question," Brooks said, his voice measured, but edged with something less patient now, something practiced. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared, every movement deliberate, shaped by years of authority worn like a second skin. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, not in protest, not in argument, but as if she were about to say something small, something careful. Then she stopped. The words never came. Instead, she inhaled slowly, a measured breath that lifted her chest just enough to be noticed if you were looking closely. The kind of breath someone takes when they choose calm over reaction. The kind of breath that holds something deeper beneath it. The cuffs settled around her wrists with a soft, final adjustment, metal against skin, not tight enough to injure, but present enough to remind. Brooks stepped back half a pace, scanning the growing circle of onlookers, aware now of the phones, the eyes, the quiet judgments forming in real time. The flashing lights painted everything in alternating color, red, then blue, then red again, turning ordinary faces into shifting masks of curiosity, doubt, and distance. Evelyn lowered her gaze for the briefest moment, not in defeat, but in reflection, as if acknowledging something only she could see. Then she lifted her head again, chin steady, shoulders relaxed despite the restraint. The wind picked up just slightly, brushing past them, lifting the edge of her coat, carrying with it the faint scent of asphalt and distant rain. And in that suspended second, before anyone spoke again, before any explanation was given, the entire street seemed to hold its breath without knowing why. The murmurs started low, like wind moving through dry leaves, barely audible at first, but growing as more people slowed down, turned, and let their curiosity anchor them in place. Not one of them stepped forward, not one voice rose to question what they were seeing, because the uniform answered questions before they were asked, and authority had a way of settling doubt before it could form. Evelyn Carter stood at the center of it all, small in frame, yet somehow unmoved by the shifting attention. Around her, her shoes planted carefully on the uneven pavement, as if she had long ago learned how to balance herself in places that did not offer stability. The plastic bag hanging from her wrist swayed gently with each faint movement of air, the label on the prescription bottle catching the fading sunlight, the printed name clear if anyone had bothered to look closely enough. But no one did, because they were not looking for details, they were looking for a story that matched what they expected. Officer Brooks adjusted his stance, one hand resting near his belt, the other hovering just slightly forward, as if anticipating motion that never came. His eyes scanning Evelyn again, searching for something that justified the firmness in his voice, something that would confirm the narrative already forming in his mind. "You were asked to show identification," he said, louder now, not just for her, but for the ears surrounding them, shaping the moment into something official, something reasonable, something that could be explained later if it needed to be. Evelyn blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if the words had to travel a longer distance to reach her. And when she spoke, her voice was soft but steady, carrying just enough to be heard without ever rising in volume. "I told you, officer. It is in my purse, right there on the seat." Her chin tilted slightly toward the old sedan parked just a few feet away, its paint dulled by years, its windows reflecting the alternating flashes of red and blue like a quiet witness. Brooks followed her gaze for a fraction of a second, then back to her face, his jaw tightening just enough to be noticed, because the explanation did not change the position of her hands, did not undo the decision already made, did not fit the sequence he had committed to. A breeze moved through again, lifting a few loose strands of her gray hair, brushing them against her cheek, and she did not react, did not attempt to move them away, her stillness becoming more pronounced with each passing second, not passive, but intentional, like someone who understood that movement could be misread, that silence could speak louder in the right moment. Somewhere behind the growing circle, a car door shut with a dull thud, followed by footsteps that slowed as they approached, blending into the quiet tension that had settled over the sidewalk. The teenage girl by the lamppost shifted her weight, her phone now fully raised, framing Evelyn and Brooks within the glowing screen, her breathing shallow, unsure whether she was documenting something important or simply something uncomfortable. Brooks exhaled through his nose, a controlled breath, and took a small step closer, lowering his voice just enough that only Evelyn could hear the next words clearly. "If you cooperate, this will go quicker." The sentence delivered like a reassurance, but carrying an expectation beneath it, one that assumed compliance rather than offered understanding. Evelyn turned her head slightly then, not away, but just enough to meet his eyes directly for the first time, and in that brief alignment, there was no challenge, no defiance, only a quiet clarity that seemed to pause him for a fraction of a second longer than he intended. Her voice, when it came again, was even softer than before, almost lost beneath the distant hum of traffic. "I have been cooperating," and the simplicity of it lingered, not loud enough to command the crowd, but strong enough to shift something unseen, a subtle tension that no one could quite name, yet everyone could feel building just beneath the surface. The light shifted as another patrol vehicle rolled slowly to a stop a few yards behind the first, its engine idling with a low vibration that seemed to settle into the pavement itself, adding weight to a moment already stretched thin. The second set of flashing lights layered over the first, red folding into blue, blue folding into red, until the entire block felt suspended inside a rhythm that did not belong to any one person, yet controlled all of them. Officer Brooks straightened slightly, the presence of backup tightening his posture, reinforcing something unspoken, something procedural, and yet his eyes flickered once more toward Evelyn as if trying to reconcile the stillness in front of him with the expectation of resistance he had prepared for. The door of the second vehicle opened with a measured swing, and another officer stepped out, slower, older, his movements less rigid, his gaze sweeping the scene not with urgency, but with quiet assessment, taking in the crowd, the phones, the distance between what was happening and how it might appear. The murmurs shifted again, not louder, but more focused now, as if the arrival of another uniform gave the situation more shape, more gravity, more reason for people to stay and watch rather than walk away. Evelyn felt the change before she saw it, a subtle shift in the air, in the way attention leaned, in the way silence held itself just a second longer between breaths. She remained where she was, her shoulders relaxed despite the restraint, her fingers slightly curled against the cool metal, not pulling, not testing, simply existing within it as though she refused to let it define the space around her. Her eyes moved once, just once, toward the edge of the sidewalk where a young boy stood beside his mother, his small hand gripping hers tightly, his gaze fixed on Evelyn with a kind of confusion that had not yet learned how to turn into judgment. She met his eyes for the briefest moment, and something softened in her. Expression, not a smile, not quite, but a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that reached beyond the situation itself. The second officer approached, stopping just behind Brooks, his voice low when he spoke, almost conversational. "What have we got here?" The question simple, but layered with the kind of experience that did not rush to conclusions. Brooks did not turn fully, only enough to answer, his tone steady, controlled, possible non-compliance, still verifying, the words chosen, carefully, fitting the script of the moment, reinforcing the structure he had already built. The older officer's gaze shifted to Evelyn then, not quickly, not dismissively, but with a pause, a longer look that lingered just enough to register the details others had overlooked, the slight tremor in her hands, the prescription bottle, the way her posture held dignity instead of defiance. The wind moved again, brushing across the scene, carrying with it the distant sound of a siren somewhere far off, unrelated yet somehow connected, as if reminding the street that this was only one moment among many. But for those standing here, it had become the only moment that mattered. Evelyn drew in another slow breath. Deeper this time, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that remained untouched by the tension pressing in from every side. And when she spoke again, it was not louder, not sharper, but clearer, each word placed carefully into the space between them. "Officer, my identification is in the car, on the front seat, right where I said." And though the sentence carried no force, no demand, it settled differently this time, as if the repetition itself had begun to reveal something beneath the surface, something that did not align with the assumptions that had brought them here. Brooks hesitated, just a fraction, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in the quiet recalculation that comes when certainty begins to thin, and for a brief second, the authority he wore so easily seemed to shift, not gone, but less absolute, as if the moment itself was beginning to move in a direction he had not fully anticipated. The older officer did not move immediately, his presence settling into the space with a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself, his eyes still on Evelyn, as if measuring something beyond the surface of the moment, something that did not fit neatly into the report that would eventually be written. Officer Brooks shifted his weight, a subtle adjustment, but enough to signal the tension beginning to press against his certainty, his gaze flickering once more toward the sedan where Evelyn had pointed, the reflection of the patrol lights rippling across its windshield like a silent insistence. The crowd leaned in without stepping closer, a collective pause stretching across the sidewalk, every small sound amplified, the rustle of a jacket, the faint scrape of a shoe, the distant hum of traffic blending into a low, constant presence beneath it all. Evelyn remained still, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, the kind of calm that did not come from ignorance, but from experience, from having stood in difficult moments before and choosing, each time, not to let them define her. The older officer finally spoke, his voice even, directed at Brooks, but meant to be heard by more than just him. "Did you check the vehicle?" The question simple, direct, leaving little room for interpretation. Brooks hesitated, just a fraction longer than expected, his jaw tightening before he answered. "Not yet." The words measured, controlled, but carrying the weight of a decision delayed. The older officer nodded once, not approving, not condemning, simply acknowledging what had been said, then gestured lightly toward the car. "Let us verify," his tone calm, almost routine. Yet it shifted the balance of the moment in a way that could be felt even if it was not fully understood. Brooks glanced at Evelyn again, as if expecting some reaction, some sign of relief or urgency, but she offered none, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady, meeting his without challenge, without submission, simply present. The wind moved through once more, lifting the edge of her coat, brushing against the metal of the cuffs, and for a brief second, the faint clink of metal against itself broke through the layered silence. Small but unmistakable, Brooks exhaled, slowly, then stepped away, his boots pressing against the pavement with a measured rhythm as he moved toward the sedan, each step carrying the quiet awareness of the eyes following him, the phone still raised, the moment still recording itself from multiple angles. The older officer remained beside Evelyn, not touching, not intervening, but standing close enough to create a different kind of space. one that felt less charged, less immediate. His gaze shifting briefly toward her wrists, then back to her face, as if silently acknowledging the restraint without making it the center of the interaction. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment, not in withdrawal, but in thought, her fingers adjusting slightly within the cuffs, not pulling, just finding a more comfortable position, her breath slow and deliberate, as if she were grounding herself in something deeper than the situation unfolding around her. Brooks reached the car, pausing beside the driver's side door, the reflection of his uniform merging with the flashing lights across the glass, his hand hovering just above the handle for a second before he opened it, the door creaking softly as it gave way, revealing the interior in a wash of alternating color. From where Evelyn stood, the inside of the car was only partially visible, shapes and shadows shifting with each pulse of light. But she did not lean forward, did not strain to see, her stillness holding, her trust placed not in the process, but in the truth she had already spoken. The crowd quieted further, the murmurs thinning into near silence as attention narrowed to a single point, the open car door, the unseen details inside, the answer waiting just beyond reach, and in that suspended moment, the balance of power, once so clearly defined, began to tilt in a way that no one could yet fully name, but everyone could feel. The car door remained open, its interior bathed in alternating flashes of red and blue that turned every object inside into something momentarily unfamiliar, then visible again, then hidden, as if the truth itself was being revealed in fragments rather than all at once. Officer Brooks leaned slightly into the vehicle, his hand braced against the top of the door frame, his eyes scanning the front seat with a focus that had sharpened, no longer routine, no longer automatic, but searching, recalibrating, trying to align what he expected with what was actually there. The silence behind him deepened, the crowd no longer murmuring, no longer shifting, every gaze fixed on the small, open space where answers were beginning to take shape. From where Evelyn stood, the scene unfolded without urgency, her posture unchanged, her shoulders relaxed despite the tension that had gathered around her, her breathing steady as if she had already reached the outcome long before anyone else had begun to question it. The older officer remained beside her, his presence quiet but attentive, his eyes now moving between Brooks and the car, observing not just what would be found, but how it would be handled, how the moment would evolve once certainty began to break apart. Brooks reached toward the passenger seat, his fingers brushing against the worn fabric before pausing, his gaze narrowing slightly as something came into view, something small, something ordinary, yet carrying more weight than the situation had allowed until now. A purse, resting exactly where Evelyn had said, its strap looped loosely over the edge of the seat, its surface marked by years of careful use, not neglected, but lived with. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lifted it, the motion deliberate, controlled, but slower than before, as if the act itself required a different kind of attention. The flashing lights caught the edges of the bag, reflecting softly across its surface, and for a moment, everything seemed to narrow to that single object, the quiet center of a storm that had been building without full awareness. Brooks opened it, his movements precise, his eyes scanning the contents with increasing focus, the shift in his expression subtle but undeniable, the certainty that had framed his earlier actions beginning to loosen, to make room for something less defined, something closer to doubt. Inside, among neatly arranged items, folded receipts, a pair of reading glasses, a small bottle of hand lotion, there it was, a wallet, placed carefully, not hidden, not out of reach, exactly where it should have been. Brooks exhaled slowly, the breath leaving him in a way that was no longer controlled, no longer part of the script he had been following. And for the first time since the moment began, his movements lost their rigid precision, replaced by something more human, more uncertain. He opened the wallet, the leather soft from years of use, and pulled out an identification card, holding it up just enough for the light to catch. The printed name, the photograph, the confirmation of everything that had already been said. Behind him, the older officer watched without interruption, his expression unchanged, but his attention sharpened, as if recognizing the exact point where the balance had shifted from assumption to reality. The crowd remained silent, but something within it changed, a subtle shift in posture, in breath, in the way people held their phones. No longer just recording, but witnessing. Evelyn did not move, did not lean forward, did not ask what had been found. Her stillness holding steady, her trust placed not in the process unfolding now, but in the truth she had carried from the beginning. Brooks lowered the identification slightly, his gaze fixed on it for a moment longer than necessary, as if reading the same line more than once, as if trying to reconcile the person in the photograph with the situation he had created. And in that quiet, suspended second, the distance between authority and accountability began to close in a way that could no longer be ignored. The identification card remained in Officer Brooks's hand a second longer than it should have, the edges catching the flashing light, as if time itself had slowed around that small, undeniable proof. His eyes traced the name again, then the photograph, then back to the name. The repetition no longer about verification but about realization, about the quiet shift that happens when certainty dissolves and leaves something heavier in its place. Behind him, the open car door creaked softly as the breeze moved through, a small sound that seemed louder now in the stillness that had taken over the street. The crowd did not move, but their attention deepened, no longer scattered, no longer curious in the same way, but focused, waiting, sensing that something had changed even if no one had said it out loud. Brooks lowered the card slowly, his posture no longer rigid in the same way, the sharp edges of authority softening into something less defined, something closer to awareness. He turned back toward Evelyn, each step measured but different now, the rhythm no longer driven by command, but by something quieter, more deliberate. The older officer watched him return, saying nothing, allowing the moment to unfold without interruption, his presence steady, grounded, as if he had seen this shift before, as if he understood that some realizations could not be rushed or forced. Evelyn stood where she had been, her shoulders still relaxed, her gaze steady, not searching his face for answers, not demanding anything from him, simply present in a way that made the silence between them feel fuller, heavier, more honest. The metal around her wrists caught the fading light, a dull reflection now as the sun dipped lower, the warmth of the day beginning to give way to the cool edge of evening. Brooks stopped a few feet in front of her, the identification card still in his hand, his grip loosening slightly as if the object itself had lost its weight now that its meaning had settled. He glanced down at it once more, then back at her, and for the first time, there was no distance in his gaze, no assumption shaping what he saw, only recognition, and something else beneath it, something quieter, harder to name. The older officer shifted his stance slightly, not stepping in, not directing, but present enough to hold the space, to ensure that what came next would not be lost or dismissed. A faint sound broke through the silence, the soft hum of a streetlight flickering on above them, casting a steady glow that replaced the fading sunlight, changing the tone of the scene from something exposed to something more intimate, more contained. Evelyn took a slow breath, her chest rising and falling in that same measured rhythm, her fingers adjusting once more against the cuffs, not pulling, not testing, just settling, as if even. Now she chose comfort over reaction, dignity over display. Brooks's shoulders lowered slightly, almost imperceptibly, the tension that had defined his posture beginning to release, not completely, but enough to be seen if you were paying attention. The crowd remained silent, but the energy had shifted, the earlier edge of judgment softening into something more uncertain, more reflective, as if each person present was quietly reconsidering what they thought they had understood. Brooks opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, then paused, the words not coming immediately, caught somewhere between what had been said before and what needed to be said now. The moment stretched, not uncomfortably, but with a weight that demanded care, demanded intention. Evelyn met his gaze without hesitation, her expression unchanged, not inviting, not resisting, simply allowing the space for whatever came next. And in that quiet, suspended pause, the sound of the cuffs, the flashing lights, the watching crowd, all seemed to fade just enough to reveal something deeper beneath it all, something that could not be undone, but could still be faced. The words, when they finally came, did not arrive with authority. They did not carry command or control. They came slower, as if each one had to pass through something unspoken before it could be released. "Ma'am," Brooks began, then stopped, the title itself feeling different now, no longer procedural, no longer distant, but weighted with something closer to acknowledgement. He glanced briefly at the identification in his hand again, then lowered it fully, his fingers loosening until it rested lightly against his palm. No longer evidence, no longer justification, just a simple fact that had been there all along. The older officer shifted slightly beside Evelyn, his attention narrowing, not to interrupt, but to witness, to mark the moment where the direction of the scene changed in a way that could not be undone. Brooks took a breath, deeper this time, the kind that did not steady him, but exposed the lack of steadiness he had been holding back, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge, replaced by something quieter, more human. "Your identification was exactly where you said it was." The sentence simple, but carrying the weight of everything that had come before it, the assumption, the decision, the restraint that had not needed to happen. The crowd remained silent, but the silence had changed, no longer tight with tension, but open, listening, as if every person present understood that what was being said now mattered more than anything that had been said earlier. Evelyn did not respond immediately, her eyes resting on him with that same calm clarity, not surprised, not vindicated, simply present, as if she had already known this moment would come and did not need to rush toward it. Brooks swallowed once, a small, almost invisible movement, then reached toward the cuffs at her wrists, his hands slower now, careful in a way that had not been necessary before, the metal releasing with a soft, unmistakable click that echoed differently than the first time, not sharp, not final, but open, like something being returned rather than taken. He stepped back slightly as he removed them, creating space where there had been none, his posture no longer towering, no longer fixed, but uncertain in a way that revealed more than any explanation could. Evelyn brought her hands forward slowly, rubbing one wrist with the other, not dramatically, not for display, just a small, natural motion, as if restoring something that had been interrupted rather than taken from her. The faint mark left by the metal caught the streetlight for a moment, then faded as her hand moved over it, her breathing still steady, unchanged. Brooks looked at her again, holding her gaze this time, not out of authority, but out of something closer to accountability. And when he spoke, the words came without structure, without the protection of protocol. "I should not have." He paused, the sentence incomplete, the admission struggling to take full shape in the open air, but the meaning already clear, already understood. The older officer exhaled quietly beside them, not intervening, not correcting, simply allowing the moment to stand on its own. Because some corrections could not be issued, they had to be realized. Evelyn lowered her hands gently, her posture unchanged, her presence steady as ever, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the same calm it had held from the beginning. "It is not about what you should have done," she said softly, each word placed carefully, not accusing, not forgiving, simply true. "It is about what you do next," and the sentence settled into the space between them, not loud, not forceful, but heavier than anything that had been said so far. Brooks did not respond immediately, his eyes holding hers as if the weight of that simple truth had shifted something deeper than the moment itself, something that would remain long after the lights stopped flashing and the crowd moved on. And in that quiet, the balance had fully turned, not through force, not through resistance, but through something far more enduring, something that could not be ignored once it had been seen. The street did not erupt when the cuffs came off. It did not fill with applause or raised voices. It simply shifted, like a held breath finally released, quiet and almost invisible, yet undeniable to anyone still standing there. The phones that had been raised remained in the air for a moment longer, as if unsure whether the story they had come to capture had reached its end or had just begun to reveal something deeper. Officer Brooks stood where he was, the empty space in his hands more noticeable now than the cuffs had been before, his fingers flexing slightly, as if remembering the weight they no longer held. The identification card rested loosely in his other hand, and after a brief hesitation, he stepped forward and extended it toward Evelyn, his arm not rigid this time, but careful, deliberate, as Though the simple act of returning it required more intention than taking it ever had, Evelyn accepted it with steady hands, her fingers brushing lightly against his for the briefest moment, not lingering, not pulling away sharply, just a natural contact that carried no tension, no resistance, only the quiet acknowledgement of a completed exchange. She opened her purse, placing the card back inside with the same care it had been kept before, closing it gently, as if restoring order to something that had been momentarily disturbed. The older officer glanced toward Brooks, his expression measured, then spoke in a low, even tone that did not carry far but was clear enough to be understood. "We are done here." The words simple, procedural, yet carrying a finality that settled over the scene like a closing door. Brooks nodded once, the motion small, almost reflexive, but slower than before, as if each movement now passed through a different awareness, one that did not allow him to act. Without considering the weight behind it, the crowd began to loosen, not all at once, but in subtle shifts, a step back here, a lowered phone there, the quiet understanding that whatever had drawn them in had reached its resolution, even if that resolution was not loud or dramatic. A man in the business suit resumed his call, his voice low as he stepped away. The teenage girl by the lamppost lowered her phone, her expression thoughtful, uncertain, as if the moment had left her with more questions than answers. Evelyn adjusted the sleeve of her coat, smoothing it down over her wrist, covering the faint impression left behind, not to hide it, but simply to return herself to a sense of normalcy, her movements unhurried, composed, as though she refused to let the interruption define the rest of her day. Brooks remained still for a moment longer, his gaze following her hands as she finished, then lifting to meet her eyes again. The distance between them no longer filled with assumption, but with something quieter, something that did not need to be spoken to be understood. "Ma'am," he said again, softer this time, the word carrying less authority and more recognition, but he did not continue. The rest of the sentence left unspoken, either because it was not enough or because it had already been said in the silence that followed. Evelyn gave a slight nod, not formal, not dismissive, simply acknowledging the moment for what it was, then turned slightly toward her car, her steps measured and steady as she moved away from where she had been held, not quickly, not with urgency, but with a quiet certainty that felt stronger than anything that had tried to confine her. The older officer watched her for a second longer, then turned toward Brooks, his voice low again, almost reflective. "You learned from this." Not a question, not an order, but something in between, something that carried expectation without force. Brooks did not answer immediately, his eyes still on Evelyn as she reached her car door, the reflection of the streetlight settling across her figure, and for a brief moment, he seemed to understand that the lesson was not in the report that would be written, not in the explanation that might be given, but in the quiet, irreversible shift that had already taken place. The flashing lights dimmed slightly as one of the patrol cars powered down, the alternating colors fading into a steady glow, and with it, the intensity of the moment softened, leaving behind only what could not be undone, and what, perhaps, could still be changed. The door of the sedan opened with a soft, familiar creak, a sound that belonged to ordinary moments, not the kind that gathered crowds or drew flashing lights. And yet it carried a quiet significance now as Evelyn Carter placed her hand on the frame and paused for just a second before stepping in. The street had begun to return to itself, not suddenly, but gradually, as if the world was remembering how to move again after holding still for too long. Footsteps resuming, voices lowering into private conversations, the distant hum of traffic reclaiming its place beneath everything else. The glow of the streetlight settled over the sidewalk in a steady wash, replacing the fading flashes of red and blue as one patrol car powered down completely, its presence no longer dominating the space, but lingering at the edges like a memory not yet fully gone. Evelyn lowered herself into the driver's seat with care, her movements unhurried, practiced, the kind that came from years of doing things deliberately, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She placed her purse on the passenger seat, the same place it had been all along, and rested her hands lightly on the steering wheel without starting the engine, her fingers still for a moment as if grounding herself in the simple familiarity of it. Outside, Officer Brooks remained where he stood, his figure no longer framed by urgency or command, but by stillness, his gaze following her without intrusion, without expectation, just watching as the moment moved beyond him. The older officer had already turned away, speaking quietly into his radio, his voice low and steady, returning to the rhythm of duty that did not pause for reflection, even when reflection was needed. The last of the bystanders drifted off, some glancing back once more, others not at all, each carrying away their own version of what had happened, their own interpretation of a moment that had been both simple and complex at the same time. Inside the car, Evelyn exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed deeper than the ones before, not because it was heavier, but because it marked an ending, a release of something that had been held without being seen. She adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, her eyes meeting her own reflection for a brief second, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging. Then she turned the key in the ignition, the engine coming to life with a low, steady sound that felt grounding in its normalcy. The headlights cast a soft beam onto the pavement ahead, illuminating the road in front of her, clear, unobstructed, waiting. She did not rush, did not pull away immediately. Instead, she sat for a moment longer, her hands resting calmly, her posture composed, as if allowing the world outside to settle fully before she re-entered it. Officer Brooks shifted his weight slightly, the movement small but noticeable now in the quiet that remained. His shoulders no longer squared with authority, but lowered with something closer to understanding, his eyes still on the car, not as a figure of control, but as someone witnessing the consequence of his own actions in the most ordinary of ways. Evelyn finally eased her foot onto the pedal, the car rolling forward slowly, smoothly, merging back into the flow of the street without drawing attention, without needing to, her presence no longer the center of anything, just a part of the world again, as it should have been from the beginning. The distance between her and the curb widened inch by inch, the sound of the engine blending into the background until it was no longer distinct, just another note in the quiet rhythm of the evening. Brooks watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared from view, the empty space it left behind more noticeable than the vehicle itself, a quiet absence that settled into him in a way no report could capture, no explanation could resolve. The streetlight above flickered once, then steadied, casting its constant glow over the place where everything had unfolded, now empty, now still, as if nothing had happened at all, and yet everything had changed in a way that could not be seen, only carried forward in silence.